Live. And we appear to be live. It's Monday, October 18th, 2021. I'm Rim.
I'm Scott.
And this is Geek Nights. Tonight we're talking about upgrading and migrating operating systems. So, I haven't actually worn a Halloween costume in a long time for a bunch of reasons, not the least of which there's been a pandemic. It's not like I'm going to Halloween parties. So, if we do a little small Halloween gathering of our friends in the city, I do have the necessary materials to wear a costume that I've threatened to wear for a very long time. And I'm moderately excited about dressing up again. It's been too long. My main regret is that I cannot go somewhere in public to inflict this costume upon just members of the public at large. I can only inflict it upon all of you, who will probably see pictures of me as a result of this.
You can inflict it on the people on the street?
Yeah.
The subway?
I guess, I'll probably city bike over to the thing rather than taking the subway. But I guess me wearing that costume on a city bike in the city, at least one person might take a picture of it if I pause long enough for them to do so.
It's gonna be cold. You might want to take the subway.
We'll see how cold it is. Also, I'm fairly resilient to the cold, so I think I can pull it off.
It's cold today.
Dad, what are you talking about? Today I would go running in shorts and a t-shirt.
Today's cold. I stayed inside today. I opened the balcony. I was like, oh, and I closed that shit.
Scott, it's 56 degrees outside. That's like shorts and a t-shirt for a run.
It's cold.
Yeah, you have become old before you became old. But a minor thing that happened to me. So get this. I wanted a modern water filter for camping, as I've talked about. So I bought pretty much the best one, and I bought it direct from REI and not from like Amazon or some shady online gray market reseller. And it arrived, and the box had clearly been opened, and a part had clearly been stolen out of it.
Okay.
Yeah, like someone had clearly like busted open this package, stole one part out of the package, and then just kind of half-assedly closed it. So now I got to return it and do a whole thing, and I do not currently have a water filter, which is super annoying. I can't even just buy that part.
You bought so many water filters. Why don't you have one?
What do you mean? What I have are single-person water filters that cannot filter bulk water for like cooking or anything easily. Like,
okay.
I could drink out of a stream. That's good for emergencies or like a short hike, but I need something to be able to filter like enough water to cook food at a campsite as well, or to refill a full like Camelback halfway through a long hike from a stream. That's not the kind of thing, like I don't have to stop and find a stream every time I want to drink. So this is like the camp filter, separate from the little life straws you carry just for like en route.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you've never camped or done anything like that before. So.
I just don't care.
Yeah, I mean, that's how do you get water if you're out in the woods for more than like a day?
All right.
Yeah. Scott doesn't do much except bike and stay home. It doesn't even play video games anymore except single player games, I guess.
I beat Metroid Dread.
Oh yeah, I haven't even started that yet. I'm still playing ActRaiser.
Actually, I was at the final boss, and then I didn't beat the final boss yet. I got to the final boss, then I went to eat dinner, and then I didn't go back yet. So it's just sitting there waiting for me.
I am playing more Splitgate though. I like that game a lot.
It's all right.
All right, so you got any news on this Monday?
Yeah, the Tim Apple graced us with an Apple event on Monday right before our show.
Yeah,
making life real easy for us over here. It wasn't a very big Apple event. I knew there was gonna be MacBooks. Everyone knew that, right? I was hoping for some AirPods Pro 2. Instead, we got regular AirPods version 3. So regular AirPods version 3 did get a nice upgrade. If I was not living in a loud place, or if I didn't value my hearing, I would be willing to get regular AirPods 3. They seem pretty good.
I guess I wouldn't still, because the only time I could ever imagine putting on headphones is when I want isolation. I don't really listen to stuff on the go when I also have to hear the real world around me. Pretty much ever.
I mean, so like, for example, my main using right now would be like when I'm riding my bike inside, right?
See, if I'm riding my bike inside, I just use actual speakers. Like, I don't even wear headphones.
there's another human being here
Yeah, I got that too.
who's sleeping.
Oh yeah, I guess the sleeping thing. We don't have that kind of problem. I can like be in one room loudly riding the bike and watching something, and Emily can be in the other room like working on stuff, and they don't really intersect with each other.
Right. Also, you could be, for example, maybe the other person is awake and, you're just watching a movie on the couch and the other person is just around, but they don't want to hear your movie that you're watching on the couch without them. So a wireless headphone is good. You could use a wired headphone, but you got a wire going all the way over to the HTPC. Like, what are you doing?
I mean,
right?
I've thought about that use case. I thought about that a lot when we first like set up the apartment, because one of the sound bars I was looking at had just like a wireless headphone receiver thing in it. But in practice, I've just never actually needed that capability at any point in my life, and I still don't.
No, but I do have these, right? So these are wireless. These are Bluetooth. They're great, and they're noise canceling and everything. The problem is these get kind of greasy, right? If you can wear them for hours and hours, but not that many hours.
So what I do have, but not for home.
And the other thing is that the noise canceling, right? The active noise canceling, you sort of have to release the air every once in a while, right? And you're obviously not going to wear these biking in one place, right? That would be the worst with this kind of headphone.
See, what I actually have for if I do need, not for when I'm in the apartment, or if I'm
also not great in bed, because I put these on in bed. If I'm sitting up, that's fine in bed, perfect.
Yep.
But I want to lay down on my side in bed. That's
see, my magic. That's where the use cases differ. I don't ever lay on my side, really. I'm 100% like.
Even if you lay down on your back, right? These lying straight down as opposed to sitting up are kind of meh. Right? You're gonna hold the screen up in front of you. Right?
I guess I've never worn
your iPad in the air with two arms straight up into the air. Your arms get tired.
I don't think I've ever in my life worn a pair of headphones in bed since middle school, when I would listen to
TV mount your screen on the ceiling so you can lay down and look straight up at it.
In middle school, I would listen to a cassette player while I was laying in bed listening to music at night with just like regular ass like Walkman headphones. And you know what? You know what happened to those headphones?
Speaker at one point.
Every pillow speaker on earth is not actually that good. I found
it was a piece of shit for $5 from Radio Shack. It sounded like garbage. It was mono. But if you're listening to AM radio, it's fine.
But those headphones I would wear like laying in bed as a teenager. Yeah, those things were just mangled beyond recognition by the fact that I wore them in bed. They were like bent and twisted.
Yeah, so, it's good to have a big headphone and a small headphone. And right now, I do have a small headphone that's perfectly fine, and it's wireless too. But the problem is it's wireless with like the cable, a little cable that goes behind the neck that's sort of annoying. And also, because it's not Apple, it does, I have mostly Apple devices that I'm connecting it to. It doesn't connect and disconnect so elegantly. It's kind of a pain
I gotta
in the
say,
ass.
it seems like the primary.
So I end up using it wired mostly. I just took the Bluetooth wire off and I attached the wire. Yeah. But then, you're biking in place and you got this wire flapping around, stuff like that.
It seems like the magic of the AirPods in general is just that if you got multiple Apple devices in particular, they just work with everything all the time. Like you don't have to futz with them.
This just works with everything all the time. Actually, these are great. The only problem with this one, the Bose one, is it can only connect two devices at once. So if you have a third device, right, and you want to switch, you either have to make sure that like one of the other two devices is off so that it picks up the third one, or you have to go to the iPhone app and choose the devices, right, tell it which ones, which is slightly annoying. So
yep. Let's see. There was an update about the Apple Music voice plan, but I don't think either of us.
That's a weird one. It's basically like, hey, you want Apple Music, but you don't want to pay so much for it. If you agree to only interface with Apple Music via Siri and not using any other interface, we'll charge you less money. And
it's so weird. I think we might have similar guesses as to why this even exists.
They want more people to use Siri.
Yep.
And they collect more Siri. No one's using Siri, so they're like, hey, maybe this will convince people to use Siri. You buy this cheap Apple Music plan for $5, the cheapest music plan there is, but the only way to listen to that music is to talk to Siri on whatever device. And if you're mostly using Siri, in your home with HomePods or whatever you got, then that might be the only way you ever interface with Apple Music, and then you'll save yourself $5 a month. So,
and I'll bet it's a combination of that and trying to get telemetry data to make Siri better or to make their music thing better in some way. But
yeah.
I think they're telling on themselves that people don't really use Siri that much, I think, no matter what with this.
It's very strange. It's a very strange thing. Also, that's kind of a bigger picture, right? There's still an ongoing drama with regards to, the music industry and the streaming companies, Spotify, Apple, everybody, right? In that they're not paying enough per song, right?
Yep.
But the problem is that what are you going to do? Charge users more? Users won't pay more.
Yep. I mean, I remember we grew up in the era of buying $20 CDs, and guess what? I just didn't bother. I would pirate stuff, and frankly, even though I love music, if I couldn't pirate stuff and I couldn't get it cheaply, I just didn't really seek out music anymore.
Yeah, so it's like the only place that money can come from is the margins from Spotify. Spotify and Apple's margins are the only place that money can come from. The only alternative would be, all right, music people, go make your own streaming service. You see what you charge for, and see how good it is, and see how many people use it, right? It's like,
well, this gets back into that broader topic we've talked about a lot, where all media, but let's just talk about music for a second. All music, it's worth less, partly because it's competing.
Not worthless, but worth
space less, like planetarium. It's
it used to be,
but it's competing with all the music that any human has ever made, because it's all just available pretty much everywhere now, coupled with all the actually free music that people are making. I mean, look at how many of those something kind of beats to something to channels have just proliferated out in the world. And a lot of people, I've seen a lot of like younger, like Xennial type kids, that's the music they listen to. They listen to like whatever's on YouTube.
Yeah. I mean, think about it like this, right? Let's say somebody handcrafts like a wooden toy of some kind, right? Like they whittle it down. It's like a beautiful handcrafted wooden toy, right? And it's like that person worked fucking hard. And if someone wants that toy for themselves or to even play with it for an amount of time, they deserve to be paid for that hard and beautiful work, right? But now imagine the world is filled with millions and millions of people who are all crafting beautiful wooden toys, and they never wear out. They can be infinitely copied. They're just everywhere, right? We're just buried in the fucking things, right? They're all amazing. All these songwriters working very hard, spending hours crafting songs that are all, musicians playing the songs very well, right? All this beautifully crafted, amazing musical work everywhere, but there's just so fucking much of it that it's like, yeah, you worked. If you think about it in terms of just one, it's like, yeah, you deserve more for this amazing work that you've created, but there's just so fucking much.
Well, this gets into this fundamental, I've touched on this a few times in recent episodes, but this idea of value-based pricing versus cost-based pricing. There's two fundamental ways to price something. You price it based on how much it costs to make it and or maintain it, like being available, or you price based on how much value the people who consume it get out of it. And the problem is the incremental value most people get out of music is infinitely small, yet the cost of making music, while it has decreased significantly, varies widely, and a lot of music, even that's made for, quote, free, and even made available for, quote, free, still costs human labor, even if that person happens to be willing to do it for free. Neither one of these models covers the modern world of how music is made and how music is listened to.
All right, so there's that, and the final thing, of course, the big one, new MacBooks, right?
Yep.
They didn't come up with M2 chips, but they got M1 Pro and M1 Max.
You want to pay what, $400 to get a little more storage in that thing?
Right. So, the base level does seem powerful enough on all the models. You can pay if you get the Max, you can pay $400 to get up to 64 gigs of RAM instead of 32. You can also go down to 16 if you don't need the 32, which I think is actually 16 is probably actually reasonable for most people.
Unless you're running a lot of.
Yeah, my desktop has had 32 for a long ass time, like maybe a decade possibly or more. And I have never once swapped, no matter what I've thrown at it, Adobe Premiere.
You know what causes me to swap with 32? There's one and only one thing. Warp stabilization on a clip that's longer than a trivial amount of time.
But like I've done 4K stuff. It's like nothing has made me use all 32 gigs of RAM ever. So I don't really, unless you are working at like an actual pro place, there's no reason to spend $400 to get a 64. That $400 isn't for 64 gigs of RAM. It's for 32 gigs of RAM because you start with the 32. You're paying $400 for 32.
Yeah.
You can go on Newegg and get 64 gigs of laptop RAM for $200 to $300, maybe $400 at most. So they're double. Right? Apple is charging 2x, more than 2x the retail cost for that RAM. Which is what Apple always does. They always overcharge for RAM. But regardless, it seems like they've done what people wanted. They made a really, really powerful MacBook with a crazy good screen. They got rid of that bar that nobody liked and really cared about, basically admitting that it was useless. They got the better keyboard on there that people like better.
Yep.
You know, I don't like it, but other people like it. And yeah. So, and they added all the ports. It's not just USB-C. All the ports you want are on there. They got an HDMI on the side.
Oh, isn't it a full-size HDMI slot, too? Like, it's just real?
Yep. Full-size HDMI. It's like they're basically like, yeah, all right, they're giving the pros what they want, right? What they've sacrificed is basically size, right? They used to offer 13 and 15-inch. Now they're offering 14 and 16-inch. Mm-hmm. So it's bigger. Also, if you look at it, you can just tell the bottom half of it is thick, right? It is thicker and it's like half a pound heavier. It's like they went on and on about, it's more efficient, which is true. In terms of like, if you're looking at like the ratio between how much electricity this thing uses versus how powerful it is and compare it to like a Windows Intel gaming laptop or something, or even a gaming desktop, or even an NVIDIA, 3080. You get more performance per watt from these than you will from those, right? Apple is winning on that front, but
well, caveat being you're not going to play a game on it still because it's a Mac.
Because it's a Mac, and you could play a game on it. It has the power to do a game, but it doesn't have it has OS X, so it's like what game can you play, right? Well, not OS X, it's Mac OS now. But also, given that an NVIDIA 3080, 3090. The maximum power, if you like get the best PC you could possibly get, it's if you ignore efficiency, this is not going to be as powerful as the PC at the highest output, right? It's like there's more total horsepower in the PC, even if you have to use gallons and gallons of fuel to get to that horsepower.
Yep. Now it looks like you can now get them with the two newer M1 chips, the Pro and the Max.
Yeah, we talked about that already. Yeah. So they didn't make M2, they just made M1 Pro and M1 Max.
I'm looking for like a benchmark on how these things actually perform with like video editing, because it seems like people have mostly talked about Final Cut.
Right. So that's the thing, is all of their software now, they finally got all Apple software is now optimized for these chips, right? So they're going to run natively and be ridiculously fast. Adobe is updating or has updated most of its stuff, but I get the feeling that if you just care about like how long a render takes or how smooth, forgetting the other factors and differences between Final Cut and Premiere or any other two equivalent production apps, you're going to get more performance out of the Final Cut one in terms of how fast it is and whatnot, because it's, and even if Adobe updates their shit, I don't think they'll be able to, they've never really approached, even on the Intel Macs, right?
Of course, also, it'll really depend on, like, if you're using a laptop, most of your use cases, you can't be worried that much about render time as long as it's within a reasonable boundary for the kind of workflow you've got, because anyone who really cares about render times has a workstation anyway.
Well, I think that's the thing, is that this thing is quite powerful and such that you're either you're actually a mobile professional. Those people do exist. How many are there? I don't know, right? But you're out and about while you're doing work that needs serious power. And this thing is big and heavy because they put a big old battery in there. So it's going to last long enough until you have to change the non-user replaceable battery.
Yep.
Or B, I think a lot of people these days, they just put the laptop on the desk, right? They don't have the desktop. They just put the laptop on the desk and plug it into monitors. And that's and this can get it done, right? This is perfectly decent.
If I wasn't a gamer and a like podcast or video editor, I would probably do that.
Well, I mean, it can do your podcasting and your video editing. It just can't do your gaming.
I don't think it could do the video editing I do as easily just because of the raw power I've got in a desktop for like multiple 4K streams.
Even the lowest end MacBook that they just announced is vastly more powerful than the desktop you have right now.
Only because I can't get a 3080.
Even if you could get a 3080.
I'd like to see the render time difference. The benchmarks I've seen have been inconclusive so far.
Well, I don't think anyone's, this thing just was announced.
Yeah.
Benchmarked it besides Apple, right?
Exactly. So we'll see.
The M1 is still ridiculous, still quite ridiculous compared to Intel CPUs.
I mean, part of the reason why I'm kind of just not that excited personally is that all of this, I'm kind of holding out for the next generation of M chips, like the M2, whatever that looks like, will probably be
interested because this thing is big. It's like it's not as big and thick and heavy as like a gaming laptop, which is ridiculous, but it's still big enough to be ridiculous. I want tiny things, right?
I feel like anyone who wants
like
tiny,
it's tiny.
Yeah, anyone who wants tiny doesn't want a book at all. They want a pad.
That's right. Get that keyboard off of there, or at least let me fold the keyboard back. Just let me fold the keyboard back, and actually, I might be really interested in.
But I think that's actually smart that they've increased the size a little bit. If the demographic is someone who needs a laptop for power for some reason,
well, the demographic, the people who actually use it professionally, I think is maybe half the demographic. The other half are people who don't actually need this much, but they buy the MacBook Pro anyway, right? It's like,
yep. A lot of people,
people doing jobs out there, it's like, just in an office or, and they're not doing anything that requires nearly this amount of horsepower, but they've got it anyway. Just like all the people who drive around the street in some massive truck and never tow anything and never put anything in the bed. Same thing.
There is one bit though, and I'm going to read this sentence from Engadget because it just says everything that needs to be said. Quote, each also has an iPhone style camera notch that is likely to be divisive.
Well, on the one hand, it's like, it's got a little notch at the top, right, with the camera in it.
That annoys me way more on a desktop or a laptop. On a phone, I don't care at all. But
vastly improved camera. But B, right? First of all, if you're sitting down in in most places, you might plug in a monitor, which won't have a notch on it.
Yeah.
Right. So that's one thing. Secondly, they've designed it so that the notch is like intruding into the bar at the top, right? The menu bar, because that's how Mac OS works. It's always had that menu bar that's separate from the, whatever the currently focused program is. Whereas on Windows, the menu bars are in the windows.
Yeah.
So there will never be anything up there except for the middle of the menu bar. So it would only ever be a problem if a program had so many pull-down menus.
Yeah.
And then I'm sure the OS is going to smartly put a gap so that, there'll be the pull down menus go on the sides and don't get hidden behind the notch. So that's really, it's not going to interfere with anything you're doing. And it's better to have that. It's like, what was the alternative? The alternative was more just to make the screen less tall by so many pixels. You're getting that many pixels more space to do stuff in, below that. So
yep. The only thing, but again, the thing that it would affect that won't matter would be if there were a truly full screen application. But again, OS X, like you're not gaming on this thing with a full screen game.
I'm pretty sure the OS, right? If you were to say take a movie and the movie happened to be of a taller aspect ratio such that you weren't going to have letterboxing.
I'm sure it just letterboxes the top across.
It'll prevent the full screen app from encroaching in that top area.
Yep.
Right?
And I would have to assume the same thing would happen if you were playing a full screen game, if you can even do that on a Mac.
Yeah. If there was a full screen game, I'm pretty sure it would cut it off and prevent it from using those pixels above where the notch is.
Yep.
And also if you put, they were smart to point out that like, hey, if you change your colors to dark mode, which I think most people do, who know that that's a thing you can do.
Yeah.
The dark mode bar is dark, and thus you don't really see the notch because it's also dark.
Yep. I expect a lot of people are going to complain bitterly about it, but the people who will complain will be the kind of people who buy a MacBook Pro anyway.
I mean, you got a new iPhone, right?
Yeah.
There's a notch on there.
Yep. You know what? The notch annoyed me for let's see, how long did it annoy me? A couple days, and then I just didn't care. Like I stopped noticing it.
Yeah. So,
it's like in the old days when you got the far superior CRT monitors in terms of brightness and color and everything would have two little lines horizontally across the screen. And if you didn't use that type of monitor and then you sat down in front of one, they were super annoying. You could not see them. But if you use one of those monitors long enough, they were just invisible to you. Like your brain just filtered them out.
Yeah.
So in
they did put the incredible screen on this MacBook. So that's
what's the resolution? 3456 by 2234 on the 16-inch one. You lose about 400 pixels on the 14-inch one. 400 rows.
It has the same like LED dynamic grid thing that the new iPad Pro has. That's sort of a toned down version of what the big Apple expensive monitor has.
Yeah. But that's not full. That's not full
monitor into this thing though. So
yeah, that's not full OLED. But as we've seen, there aren't like OLED monitors have a lot of issues still.
Yeah. No, I mean I think this technology is it's like the monitors that other companies are making that sort of have the sort of zoned lighting, right? It's dynamic lighting, backlighting, whatever.
Yep.
Yeah, it's like, but Apple just took that to the next level. There's just so many more lights all controlled individually. Whereas on my monitor, it's like, there's some dynamic, backlighting, but it's like, what, like 8 zones? It's like such a small number, right? You can actually see the light like moving. Right? It's not great compared to what Apple has done.
But yeah, pretty much I'm personally like really looking forward to what the next generation of all this stuff Apple's done with these chips are, and whether or not Windows and gaming and GPUs become part of that ecosystem at some point, or if GPUs become irrelevant with this technology.
Yeah. I don't see myself buying a MacBook Pro anytime soon because I'm really like between iPhone and iPad, it's like I'm good. I got iPhone, iPad, desktop. That's my combo, and I don't see any, it's pretty much perfect. But
and I got iPhone, laptop, workstation.
Yep. The only thing I could see is in a distant future. It would be quite distant, actually. In a distant future where my desktop is no longer powerful enough to get the job done, and yet the Mac with its M's has so far surpassed the PC that even though my dislike of Mac OS, the PC is no longer like tenable, right? For powerful computing. In which case, I think what would happen is my PC would become sort of like my, Apple II GS. It'd be like the thing I have so that I can run old software that the Mac can't run. And then I would just get, MacBook Pro with like an M5 on my desk, right?
Yep. Which will really come down to if this world will ever support gaming in any reasonable way.
Yeah, that could, in a world that's like that, if the PCs stagnate in terms of performance enhancing, which is really, I guess, on Nvidia's shoulders, mostly. But yeah, if PCs somehow stagnate performance-wise and Apple pulls too far ahead, that could hurt PC gaming as a whole for people who don't make Mac ports of their games. Right?
Yep.
But I think it also is going to matter a lot in terms of the rest of the world, right? The rest of the world is, I think, Macs aren't so popular, and depending on where you are, right? All those people in, say, China, right? It's like they're playing all their games. I don't think they're playing them on Macs over there. Right?
Yep. Plus, in terms of stagnation, I'm running, my workstation still is an i7 6700K. That is a 6th generation Intel CPU. We're on what, Gen 11 right now?
I have an 8700K with a 1070 and it's perfect.
My 6700K, literally two things have ever pushed that CPU to 100%. One of those things, that warp stabilizer I talked about before, same thing that pushes the RAM, very niche edge case in Premiere. And 2, Hearts of Iron 4 is CPU intensive, and it maxes out my CPU when the war gets pretty complex. Everything else is using 20% of my CPU, maybe. Even when I'm playing games or rendering 4K video or do something crazy, I'm using almost no CPU. It's all GPU. It's all GPU in there and hard drive to a degree. So
yeah, but in the case of the M chip, you don't have a separate GPU. It's all the one chip doing everything. It's system on chip.
Yep.
Right? And
it'll just come down to, can that chip actually achieve the performance of a 3080 in the way that games use GPU type processing? Or will games change the way they're built?
It could, but the problem is that games, if you took, say, a brand new game like, Doom Eternal or something, right? because it's so different architecturally, you'd have to like rewrite a large portion of the game engine, or at least to do some major porting and optimization work.
Or the M.X chips get so powerful or so good at virtualization to somehow make that moot.
Well, the Rosetta thing is quite strong.
Yeah.
But
that's why it's hard. It's hard.
I don't know if it's strong enough to play it.
Exactly. That's what I'm getting at. It is hard to predict what this ecosystem will look like, but 5-ish years from now, I think we'll know where the real trajectory is.
Anyway,
and some other news we don't have to dwell on, but there's an interesting story. This might be the first time this exact specific legal scenario has happened. Though similar things or related things have definitely happened. Long story short, this happened recently, like October 6th. A kid in Hopewell, this news site is not telling me what state that's in. Anyway, this kid printed components and also bought other components to make a gun, like a Glock pistol, basically. Put it together.
Had a 3D printer of their own?
Yep, had a 3D printer of their own. Basically made a Glock. And then proceeded to immediately accidentally shoot themselves. They're not dead. They just hurt themselves with this gun. And now the question is...
Where bullet from? They can't print the bullet.
You can just buy bullets. Bullets are pretty easy to get.
Who sold ammo to a kid?
Depending on the state you're in, it is very legal for kids to get bullets.
Yeah, well, that's a problem. Anyway.
Yeah. So anyway, if we've talked about this before, in the U.S., most firearms, like the only thing that's actually regulated is one very specific component of the firearm. Usually it's like the lower receiver. And that's the part...
It's hard to to write legal regulations for,
Well, hey, if you're a nerd, if you're a computer nerd, all right, look at my desktop or look at your desktop. What part of that is the computer if you have to write a law that regulates computers? Is it the CPU? Is it the motherboard? What if I swap the motherboard but use the same CPU? Is it a different computer? That same question comes up in guns.
Right.
And guess what? Judges in the legal system can't fucking define either one.
Well, again, okay, so let's not go into it, but the problem is that in the United States, where it's the reason they have to define these things is because they're trying to make some guns illegal and others not illegal.
Yep.
If they were just making guns illegal, you wouldn't have to define which parts.
Yeah, if we could define something that uses a combustible explosive to fire a projectile above a certain speed in a particular direction, this would all be a lot easier.
Yeah, any tool, any machine that does this is illegal. Done. That's really easy to write a law for that. But it's like, okay, a barrel is just a metal tube. What are you going to do? Outlaw metal tubes?
Yep, and that's the thing. People might say, the reason I'm bringing up this news is a lot of people make the argument that we don't need to worry about this problem yet because you can't actually 3D print a gun that will work. And that is mostly true. However, you can totally 3D print the one or two pieces that you can't just buy because they're regulated. And most of the rest of the things you need are not that regulated or even completely unregulated. I can go buy metal tubes and all these other parts and machine everything I need and 3D print just this last piece. So the question of how do we deal with the fact that people can 3D print enough stuff to make a real working gun to the point that they actually shot themselves with it by accident? How are we going to address that as a technology in America?
No, we talked about this in an extremely early episode of Geek Nights, 10 plus years ago. So,
and guess what? No one answered that question. And here we are now where it's not clear that the police can actually even charge this kid with a crime. And also they're investigating. Now they're investigating.
Would it be a crime to hurt yourself?
Well, would it be a crime to have made the gun in the first place?
Well, maybe, but hurting yourself doesn't. It's like that. It shouldn't be a crime.
Well, making a firearm that is dangerous enough to then hurt yourself or someone else could hurt themselves with.
That might be worthy of being a crime. Yeah.
Yep. I think we're gonna see as more incidents like this occur. I think we're gonna see calls, regardless of if that's the right way to go, on regulating 3D printers, on regulating 3D printing technology, on regulating plans for 3D printers, which then might violate our favorite amendment, the First Amendment.
So that's a really sad thing if it comes to be, because I don't think people realize this enough, right? But when you look out at the world of technology and different product categories, 3D printing is like the one category where the open source, open hacker ethos type of thing has like won out in the marketplace.
It won, it lives, it thrives. I can get a 3D printer, print my own stuff.
Not buying a 3D printer as like this sealed device that comes with proprietary software that you can't repair from Apple, right? You're getting a 3D printer that interoperates with the same files as every other 3D printer, where you can choose where you get your plastic from. You can use it with any kind of software. You can program it yourself. Every 3D printer is all open, and almost all of them are open and cool and hackery.
Even the advanced ones, the ones that like some nerd is not going to just buy and put in their basement, like the ones that are at a Shapeways or like in a factory that can do like metal printing or carbon fiber or whatever ridiculous nonsense.
Like the 3D printing marketplace in terms of capitalism, that's what it looks like when Linux on the desktop wins. Right? That's what it looks like when Linux on the desktop wins and everyone has a phone that runs. Right? It's like, that's what that looks like. But we only managed to succeed in getting our ideal, thing through in that one area.
I do have a minor counter argument, though. My minor counter argument, a little bit of a devil's advocate, but also kind of an earnest argument. It's still the early stage of Linux on the desktop, because what we don't have yet is a mass market of people using this stuff, to the point that an ecosystem for malware, fake plans, failed nonsense, like print a Gucci bag. Like, we didn't get to the point where everybody's using these things. We're at the point where nerds are using these things. Open source software, Linux on desktop, was great when nerds just wanted to not pay for Office. But now, even the best open source Office is like deeply inferior to like regular old Microsoft Office. Never mind the fact that no one's running Linux on the desktop.
Right.
I dare you.
3D printing gets to diamond age levels of printing. I think you'll see big, wealthy companies enter the market.
I think you'll also see malware. Like, what were the early computer viruses, even on Linux? Like, people would write them.
You go to your diamond age printer and you're like, make me a cupcake. It's a poison cupcake. You die.
Make me a gun. The bullet comes out the back. Like,
you stand there watching the gun get printed and it shoots you while you're watching.
Someone hacks your 3D printer and starts printing bootlegs in your house while you're on vacation, then breaks into your house and steals them.
Anyway,
this is a story that is not going to change anything, but we're going to see over the next 5 or 6 years a lot more stories like this bit by bit. And the fascinating thing to keep an eye on is that our government is so paralyzed that nothing will be done in the law about any of this anytime soon. And we're going to see how this evolves with this basically zero regulation and zero government intervention.
Yeah, it would have to be something that it became like a real constant terror for everyone of all parties for the government to do anything.
Despite the fact that this is like trying to regulate things like CNC printing. Like, it's not a matter of closing the barn door. The entire barn fell down. It disappeared decades ago. No one is even sure there ever was a barn. And maybe before we die, someone in the U.S. Congress will talk about this once or twice. All right. But anyway, things of the day. So, in the gaming world, the Nintendo Entertainment System era, there was a race to make a special like controller that you could sell to the market that wasn't a traditional controller for mostly, honestly, stupid marketing reasons. But you had one company making the Power Glove and one company making the U-Force. They were both garbage products. We all know this in retrospect. As kids, we even knew this at the time. I saw the Power Glove. I knew it was bad. I saw the U-Force. I knew it was bad. I knew I didn't want it. But what this is a video that explains in detail where one of these things, the U-Force, which was wireless hands-free controllers for the Nintendo Entertainment System, where it came from, the engineering behind it, the design, the history, like the full story of a piece of technology that on one hand was really cool and innovative and worked really hard to make a usable product, and two, made a product that no one on Earth wanted, and mostly spent their efforts trying to make a market for something and then get people to want it, despite the fact that the fundamental thing was honestly a terrible idea from the beginning that could never have succeeded, no matter how good the technology was. And it is fascinating to see how product design happened in that era, especially because they interview people who were directly involved, who even now are pretty excited about this stuff and sort of miss the fact that they were almost doing the wrong thing and almost misusing the technology because they were trying to solve a market problem that didn't exist. So what do you got?
Oh, thing of the day? Yeah, what was my thing of the day? All right, just this cute little thing. So if you open your any Unix computer and you go to the terminal and you type in cal, C-A-L, it'll print out this nice little text calendar for you. It defaults to the current month, usually. And it's kind of nice, especially you might want to email someone and show, the monthly calendar with, the numbers laid out and see what day and everything. It's pretty useful, right? If you don't have a wall calendar. But, that's not everyone's got a terminal.
Yep.
Sometimes you got a phone, maybe, right? And sometimes, just for whatever reason, you want a text calendar, just made out of ASCII, but in this case, Unicode text. A calendar. This website, QWERTY.dev/calendar generator, allows you to generate and easily copy into your clipboard a calendar of a single month, sometimes with certain days highlighted or whatever, in Unicode. And then you can copy and paste it into, I don't know, a tweet, a forum post, an email, wherever you might need to put a calendar. So it's just a tiny, cute, and useful thing there. So
it does, though, expose an accessibility problem that has come up a lot recently in social media around emoji, where if you copy pasted this into pretty much anything, and whoever happened to see it was blind and using a screen reader, it would destroy their screen reader with long, ridiculous nonsense. And there's no way around that, despite the fact that for literally any other user, this is more accessible and honestly very useful.
Yeah.
But you could cause a problem if you copy pasted this into a tweet for anyone who happened to use a screen reader to view that tweet in a way that a copy paste of an image screenshot of a calendar would not cause that same problem.
But the image screen of a calendar, they wouldn't be able to read it.
But it would just say image in the screen reader instead of bracket.
If you tweet images, you should be putting some alt text on there, people. Right?
Yep. But where's the line?
October monthly calendar with with the Wednesday the 13th highlighted or whatever it is.
But there's no way to do that with an ASCII calendar.
I suppose not. I guess ASCII art in general is just really inaccessible to people who can't.
It's not even unaccessible. It's anti-accessible in that the way screen readers work, it destroys the screen reader.
Yeah, I guess what would a cockboat look like? It'd be like /_8 equals D underscore forward.
Well, the same thing happens.
It's like.
So a lot of us like to use a lot of emoji. If you put more than a couple emoji in a row, it also just ruins screen readers, despite the fact that for anyone else, that is often a useful or interesting visual way to display information. Granted, I would say the actual solution here, where the problem lies, is with the screen readers themselves need to be intelligent enough to handle this type of situation the way people will naturally use technology in an open forum without constraints. But I digress. This thing is super cool. It's just something I thought of because that's a topic I've been thinking of a lot lately for other reasons.
Absolutely. Think about that very important topic.
Yep. You might not have the right answers when you think about that topic. You might not be able to say, well, this is the right idea, but at least think about it. That's the first step. In the meta moment, Tale of Genji is our book club book. I actually haven't read it since last week because this past weekend I was super busy. But I will be continuing with Genji this week. Our last PAX panel is on YouTube. We will not be going to conventions anytime soon. I don't know what else we got going on. Check out our stuff on the internet. Our Discord's hopping.
I completely redid and finished redoing the newsletter software that we have going on. So if you go to newsletter.frontrowcrew.com, you're going to see a form to subscribe to the newsletter, and you're going to see a link to go to the archive to peruse all old newsletters. And there's an admin interface you can't reach because I secured it. You go to send newsletters. And because we have this platform now, assuming it works, we're going to test it out with the next newsletter that I started writing. We can, I'm not saying we're going to do this, but we could write more. We could add more newsletters than just the Geek Nights newsletter. This is like a news.
I'm excited about, because a long time ago I did blog like with the Rimbler, like in parallel to Geek Nights, and I stopped just 'cause I didn't have a good place to do it, and I was also bored and lazy.
I'm not saying we're going to do this, but we have the technological capacity now to make as many newsletters that would all have to be subscribed to separately. And, there's some other benefits of having this. So yeah, it's up now. And so that's the thing.
Yep. And the last thing I got,
at least since I mentioned it on the last show, at least like 2 people came and subscribed. So
I have a second dibs for once.
Oh, Rim's going to get rid of something. Okay.
And it's a real something, but I'm going to be clear. I would prefer to give this to someone in the New York City area, but I could meet you at a subway station to give it to you. I have got a large, full-featured LED light panel, like a big for-real one with a stand and everything, and a large gray backdrop for making video with all the poles and everything to set it up. That's portable, take it up, put it down together. So if you are a person who is trying to make videos and you could use a for real LED light panel spotlight with hoods and everything on it and a gray backdrop and all that biz, if you're in New York City, let me know and I'll sort out a way to get it to you. I would prefer to give it to a Black, Indigenous, and or person of color as opposed to just a white dude. Full disclosure, if nobody wants it and the only people who ask are white dudes, I will eventually give it to one of you. But if you're not a white dude, reach out to me first because I really want to enable creators and this stuff is really useful. If you're asking why I'm getting rid of it, I have better, more compact light panels and better backdrops now. So I don't see a world where I would ever use these again. Not because they're bad, just because they don't suit my own personal use cases anymore. That's the only kind of thing I'll try to give away on second dibs because all the other stuff I've already tried to give away and no one wants.
I mean, everything I tried to get rid of, I successfully got rid of for money. I just let people name their price and I was like, all right.
Yeah, I'll give this away for free as long as you can meet me somewhere in New York City to give it to you.
Oh, okay.
So, let's get into it. Operating systems, upgrades, changes, everything. Partly, I'm thinking about this because Windows 11, depending on who you are and how much you care, either came out or is coming out. Mac OS updates, but also switching operating systems in general. I switched from Android OS to iOS recently, and that's the first.
True.
That's the first time I have switched operating systems on a device since when I went from Linux on the desktop to about 2 days.
Palm OS to Android.
I did do Palm OS to Android.
Web OS to Android.
I also did Linux on Windows to Linux on the desktop. There was a time when Scott and I both did Linux on the desktop. I then went for about 48 hours to Mac OS, and then I went from that back to Linux on the desktop, and then very quickly after that to Windows. But also, there's a bit of a history here. This is a broad topic of we're old enough to remember where this wasn't a thing. You didn't upgrade the operating system often on pre-internet computers, other than maybe, if you were lucky, you got a copy of Windows 3.1.1 and installed that to replace your Windows 3.1. But that's if you were lucky. Some people upgraded
Windows. There wasn't really, for most people, the difference between Windows 3.0 and 3.1 or 3.1.1 was basically nothing.
Yep.
Right? It's they all ran the same software.
You only needed Windows 3.1.1 if you had a network card, basically.
Right, but it's maybe if you had an office and our office had a tech guy who actually could set up the work group stuff, right? And it meant something, but that was almost nobody. Almost nobody actually had that stuff doing anything. A lot of people had Windows for work groups on their computer, but they weren't actually doing any work groups. They just had it.
Yep, I had it because I had an actual Ethernet card because of our early cable modem and some other stuff, and we did use it, but I didn't do it. Upgrading back then was not like upgrading is now. But also what an OS is and what it means has changed a lot since those early days where the OS was based. I mean, we did a whole show on OSs in ancient Geek Nights times. Was basically just the meta system that you use to interface with the computer itself. But now operating systems come along with a lot of their own baggage and stuff, and in most cases are the user experience of a computer, as opposed to just the thing you use to launch the things that are themselves the user experiences. So
yeah, there's a great talk, actually. Let me send Rim this link so you can include it in the show. There's a recent talk from Usenix, which is supposed to be an operating system conference, right? There you go. And it basically talks about, it's time for operating systems to rediscover hardware. And basically what he's talking about in this here, I'll really TLDR, but or TW, but you should watch this. Even though it's an hour long. What he talks about is like, hey, the operating system is supposed to be the piece of software that goes between the hardware. Because it used to be back in the day, every program you wrote had to talk to the hardware directly. And that wasn't tenable, right? It's like you looked at how many, DOS games had to have drivers for all these different sound cards, right? That wasn't, you had to tell your IRQ to a video game. That was not sustainable. So the operating system was supposed to go between the hardware and the software so that you could write a program and have it run on a wide variety of different hardware as long as the same operating system was on all that hardware, because the operating system would expose the same interface to the software and then translate that with drivers and other things to whatever hardware was there. And that was the job of an operating system, right? An operating system also would provide a shell, which is like the default user interface, right, for doing stuff.
Yep.
that wasn't a particular piece of software.
But and like early versions of Windows, like pre 3.0 even, you would run DOS, and then you would run Windows from within DOS.
Yeah, exactly. Now, what's happened nowadays, and what he's talking about in this lecture, is that the actual operating systems, all of them, not just, I guess, except Mac OS, because they control their hardware also and sort of avoid this problem, is that they're not really managing all the hardware that's in the computer, because this, the architecture that is actually in the computer does not resemble the, fictional architecture that the operating systems are designed around, right? So what's actually happening is, like, for example, in your computer, you have like these systems on a chip. You might have like a power management module in some chip somewhere that's managing all the power stuff on your motherboard and between all your different hardware.
No. And
the operating system doesn't even know that that's going on, right? Normally, the operating system should be talking to like a power management chip and doing things like, because the operating system knows like what software the user's running. So it could be like, okay, turn that off, turn that on, right? And Mac OS does those sorts of things because they control the whole picture. But in terms of all the other computers, they basically push the operating system, the one that you're interfacing with, into a corner where it can believe that this old model is still true. And then all the hardware is like managing itself. In some cases, you have hardware in your computer like running Linux on its own,
yeah,
like a separate operating system and like a chip somewhere. Because each, like your GPU, right, that video card might have its own computer in it running Linux that your computer is talking to, thinking it's just a video card, but it's another computer in there, right, that's hiding this whole world from your main operating system. And his goal is like, hey, let's actually write the software for every part of the computer, right? So the operating system is truly the operating system, and all those things are working together and knowing about each other.
But also,
in a world like that, right, if that truly, happens, and it's like, yeah, you need to have an operating system, and you're going to need to update it when hardware updates. Like, you put a new hardware in, you're going to need to, like, get your operating system into that hardware to, like, install it and,
I think that almost edges into this point to where the traditional definition of operating system is simplistic and honestly not relevant to the modern world in any capacity. And with
all these firmwares and microcodes and things, it's like those are softwares that are creating like yet another layer between the user and the hardware.
Like, I would go so far as to say that
user-facing software and the hardware.
I would say that Mac OS and Windows are not by any old definition operating systems in any meaningful way anymore. They are platforms.
Yeah, pretty much. But I mean, it's also most of the operating system stuff, even on Mac OS, has, gets pushed into like the kernel, whatever the kernel is. and they still provide on top of their kernel, right, all of this user land stuff, libraries, tools, all this other things, right? That's why, piece of crap Richard Stallman would always talk about GNU Linux, because it's like Linux on itself is just a kernel. It's like that kernel on its own doesn't do anything.
Then you got a bunch of binary files you can execute using that kernel.
All this GNU stack stuff that you put on top of it, that's what the user is interfacing with before they've installed other software, even though some of that stuff might itself be software. And we've sort of colloquially, right, included all of that like default platform ephemera stuff, the default user interface, the shell. We consider all of that to be now the operating system, when just speaking casually, when that's not really the operating system. That's just like bundled software by the technical definitions of operating system.
But we're at this point too where even compute professionals using computers in very professional and technical tasks, those distinctions don't actually matter to most of them in a material way, in a way that in the old days, they did matter a lot more, partly because things were a lot simpler and there were different operating paradigms. Now we're at this point to where even for me, like those distinctions do not matter at all in my use of computers.
Yeah, no, they don't matter for the person at all. They just matter for, the underworld of, and there's also just a lot less people like working and thinking about operating systems, right?
Yep.
So they've been very stagnant, even while the rest of, that's part of the other problem is hardware and user-facing software, right? All these other parts of the computing landscape have been making progress. Like there's getting pushed forward. But operating systems are really not moving very much. They're sort of still the same as they were years and years ago, right?
I think the two things that operating systems matter for users are either one, what default user experience do you prefer? And two, what software do you run or hardware do you use that is supported or not supported on the platform that operating system implies?
Yep, that's pretty much it, right? It's like, I have the computer. It's a tool. What do you want to do with this tool? I want to accomplish these things. These are the things that I do and care about the most. All right, well, what the software that you're using is this, this, and this. Does it run on this operating system? Yes. Does it run on this other one? No. Well, I guess I know which operating system you're choosing.
Yep.
It runs on both. Okay. It runs on both. Which one do you like better?
So I guess let's start with upgrades first, because in the oldest days, you wouldn't upgrade your operating system, really, because it didn't matter. You'd probably replace the hardware before you thought to...
I don't remember if there was actually even an upgrade thing for, like, until Windows 95. I think Windows 95 might have been the first that I remember there being an option to, like, put in the CD-ROM and then say, upgrade my current computer from whatever it is to Windows 95. It didn't work a lot of times if your computer wasn't just so, but I don't remember an earlier thing where you could upgrade in place.
Even when you could, like Windows 2000 could, if I recall correctly, I'm 99% sure it did. I didn't trust that at all, and I did a clean install of Windows 2000.
Yeah, I didn't trust it, right?
Yep. But also
because the way PCs are structured, your operating system was so tied in with disk partitioning and that sort of thing, because you had to get the boot record in there and all that nonsense. Is basically what I always have and still do have a separate disk and or partition where the operating system and its files live alone with nothing else. And that way, if I have to reinstall the operating system or anything like that, I don't lose my data, which is all in other disks and other partitions. I can just delete the operating system, reinstall it, no problems. I've just always done it that way because that used to be the way, and I still do it that way, and it's
you know what? I would say if you make your own computer, it still is the way, because it has saved me hassles so many times, even in recent memory, to do it that way.
Yeah, I mean, I just upgraded to Windows 11 with no fear, because I'm like, if this doesn't work, I'll just erase that disk
and install Windows 10 again, and like no harm, no foul. Reinstall some games.
Not much time at all.
Like reinstall Steam. All the data files are already there. Like, okay.
Yep. It's really good.
But also one distinction we should make. Back then, there weren't really like security updates to operating systems, like incremental updates within a version. because
when did Windows Update become a thing?
I don't even know from memory off the top of my head. It's easy to forget that there was no reason to update a Windows 3 computer unless you ran into a bug of some kind. You weren't on the internet, or if you were, you weren't on an internet like we're on an internet today.
Mm-hmm. It does say that it was for Windows 9X and Windows NT. Oh yeah, that one. I remember that. Okay. I've seen that GUI before. Windows Update was introduced as a web app with the launch of Windows 98.
See?
Now, that's right. And then they retroactively made it work with 95 and NT4. Okay.
Yep.
I remember Windows 98, you would go to that website in IE, and that's where you would get, I remember now. Not that I see the screenshot.
Yep. But we got to this point to where we hit a point with the internet where you had to upgrade to newer versions of operating systems to be able to get security and hardware updates that were necessary to keep using your computer. Like, you can't keep running Windows 2000 today because you're not going to get any updates, and you're going to get owned the second that thing touches the internet.
Well, security updates are one reason. Also, that was a time when things were progressing, right? Computers were getting more powerful. The architecture of the operating system had to actually change to keep up. It wasn't enough just to add new drivers for the new hardware.
Yeah, Windows 2000 was based on the NT paradigm, and they sunset the other Windows crap.
Right. It's like
with an asterisk, we remember Windows Millennium, but
yeah. The operating system itself needed to be updated to take advantage of newer hardware. Things like RAM limits. It's like, the operating system couldn't handle more than so much RAM. It's like, we changed from, 32-bit computers to 64-bit computers. I guess they need a new operating system. The operating system is a 32-bit operating system.
Yep.
You got to got to fix the whole thing.
But what this meant was I wouldn't, hardware and operating system update cadences tended to be pretty well aligned. So I had a Windows 95 computer. It came with Windows 95. When we got a new computer, I just installed Windows 2000 on it. I did not actually try to upgrade the Windows 95 computer. We left it as is. That's the kind of thing we would do. Our 486, which was running Windows 3.1.1, we never upgraded that. We just left Windows 3.1.1 on it forever.
I upgraded the Windows 3.1. That computer had, when we got it, it had OS2 Warp and Windows 3.1 in a dual boot with PC DOS situation.
Oh, yeah, you had the PC DOS.
Because it was an IBM computer, right? And I did wipe it and put Windows 95 on it. And then the computer that I brought to college, the one that I built in the late 90s, the first computer that was my computer, I started with Windows 98 SE, the one that had USB support. Right? Or no, I started with 95B. Then I went to 98, and then 2000. And then that was the end of that computer.
I want to say 95B supported USB, but 95A did not.
Yeah, I had, because, it went from 95B to 98 to 2000.
But here, my Windows 95 computer?
The next computers, I think a lot of them were all XP. I did get a Vista at one point. And then I think I went from Vista to 7. I don't know if I did anything in between.
I know I went from the Vista era, I had Vista on a laptop, to Linux on the desktop and didn't have any Windows PCs for a long time. And then the next Windows PC I built was Windows 7.
Yeah, Vista to 7. Yeah, XP, Vista, 7.
I only ever had Vista
8. I didn't do Windows 8. I went from 7 to 10. So the current computer I have started with Windows 7. It went to 10, and I just upgraded to 11 yesterday.
Yep, I cannot upgrade mine to Windows 11 because Windows 11, I don't have a TPM module in my CPU because my CPU is the 6th generation. But even if I did, or I buy one and stick it into the computer or futz with my motherboard, it's moot because Windows 11 formally does not support 6th generation Intel CPUs, despite the fact that they perform about as well as current generation Intel CPUs.
Yeah, I don't think it's a performance issue. I think
definitely not.
There's all sorts of other things. There was, the Spectre and the Meltdown situation. Yep. Right. And there were all sorts of other things like different features being added to the, instruction sets and all sorts of things of that nature. I think that, it's a lot of work for Microsoft to support and guarantee security updates and things working on such a wide variety of CPUs. It's I think they've narrowed it down to okay, this covers enough of our market our target audience to support these ones, right? It's going to be too much work for too few added sale. Well, I don't know if they're not selling Windows 11. It's free. I guess you can buy it, but if you don't have you can get a free upgrade though from 10. So if you support it, so it's like they're just like, okay, it's too much work to support those, and we won't. Not that many people have them.
So that's the thing. A ton of people have them. Is this thing that seems to have come out recently because for various reasons, the i7 6700
not enough to be worth it for the Microsoft to want them to upgrade.
But we're in this weird situation where the i7 6700K was the most popular Intel chip of its era because that was the best price to performance ratio for gaming at the time. So pretty much everyone for like a multi-year period was buying this one Intel chip if they were building their own computer.
My 8700K seems to be over the line, I guess.
Yep. But there's also a ton of laptops that use the 6th generations that just can't upgrade either.
Right. But unlike operating system updates in the olden days, right, where it's like, oh, this, you have a software that only works on the new one or the old one or whatever. It's like, I just upgraded to Windows 11. It's like, okay, it's perfectly fine if you can upgrade to it. I don't see why you wouldn't, unless you're just one of those people who gets really mad about tiny user interface changes, like the start button moved from the left to the middle. Oh no, big deal. All right, I just push the Windows key. What does it matter where it is? I don't click on it. So, but it's basically the same. It's 99% the same freaking thing as Windows 10.
And no Windows 10
it runs all the same software. The performance is the same. Like, what does it matter? Right?
Windows 10 is going to continue to get security updates and like regular updates until 2025.
4 years? Yeah, so, 4 years.
So the problem is, I think my desktop will still be more than adequate 4 years from now. But
I hope so.
Yeah, I'll figure out what to do by then.
Yeah.
The GPU is the sole limit on this thing's potential right now.
Like I said, if for some reason, right, I can no longer get things going on this computer for the tasks I have that are performance intensive, I'll just, if I have to, I'll get the M2, M3 for those tasks, and I'll keep this around to do all the things that the M2, M3 can't.
But I guess
can't do.
Operating system upgrades, all that history we talked about is like moot, and if you're not worried about old computers, none of that matters anymore. So the state of the world today is if you're running Windows or Mac, like the two, or Android or iOS, the four most used non-Chromebook things on Earth, then you should pretty much upgrade to the newest versions when you can, if you can, and if you can't, stay on the version you're on. And it's very incremental, and it's not like this earth-shattering change like operating system upgrades used to be.
One thing that does happen to Mac people who are developers, because the OS, the Mac OS like Unix user space is all weird and not great. I recommend actually, I'm not a big Docker fan, but if you develop on a Mac, I think you should probably just use Docker and or VMs, because if you don't, and a lot of times people at my work, because I'm like the only not Mac person at work, right, a lot of times they update their Mac OS and it breaks all their developer shit, right, that was installed with the homebrew or whatever, because that's what happens there, right. There's nothing wrong with the rest of the operating system, or like all their normal functionality is just fine, but it's like, because that's not like a part of the the OS that, Apple is caring and thinking about a lot, especially because it's not like that homebrew stuff is an Apple thing. It's like a third-party open source thing, right?
Right.
So they break it and they don't give a crap. They're like, it's not their problem.
Yep, but generally you should just stay on the newest version of the OS as much as you can on pretty much any platform. Linux, like servers get a bit complicated, and mostly because they're running Linux a lot of the time. And Linux,
there's no such thing as like operating, there sort of is, but there usually isn't a such thing as operating system version, right? The way that most Linux distros, and obviously there's many of them, right? Some of them they don't have versions. They're just like, okay, we're updating all the time. That's it. We're just always updating all our different pieces of software all the time. That's it, the end. But what a lot of them do is they do specify versions like Debian and Ubuntu and those sorts, right? And they'll give them names. And what happens is they're like, okay, that version, right, has this set of software together. And then that stuff will all get security updates, right, together in harmony. But it won't get like, for example, maybe you got Firefox on there. They'll keep updating that Firefox, right, versions with security updates, but they won't bring you up to a newer, real Firefox version, right? They'll keep all those, like, we know that this combination of software with these versions together all works nicely. We're not going to upgrade anything. We're just going to security update you. And then you got to go to a newer OS and like explicitly like unlock, right?
Yeah.
The newer set. It's like, all right, well, here's a newer set of versions that we know all work together. And it's like you intentionally upgrade yourself to that newer set, that's in harmony with itself. And some of them they designate as LTS, which means long-term support, so that you can stay on that version and keep getting security updates for like 5 years or longer.
Pro tip, if you have something in production, use the LTS version of whatever Linux distro you care about.
Yep. And some of them, they specify just like, this is just a short-term version, which is really something you'd only use on like a desktop computer, right?
Yeah.
It's only going to get support for how long,
So in terms of
a desktop computer, you're more likely to need the newest versions of things.
In terms of actually switching operating systems, I think we can skip a conversation of like trying to move servers from Solaris to Linux or any stuff like that. But in terms of desktops or phones or like normal stuff, most people go between Windows and Mac or Mac and Windows. But we did both have the experience of going from Windows to Linux on the desktop and from Linux on the desktop back to Windows. And I think the thing that I find the most interesting and I have the most to say about that is simply that in the time that Linux on the desktop was ascendant and viable, 90% of everything I did on a computer was in a web browser, and the remaining 10% were task-specific things where I knew of specific open source software that ran on Windows and Linux that could do what I needed. So the transition was just a matter of learning a new UI that I could customize, and that was it. Like, there was no difference between Windows and Linux in a time when I wasn't gaming.
Yeah, it used to be that, all your stuff was files. So you'd have to, when you switched something, you had to get your files, right? And then you had to figure out software that could read your files, reorganize them, right? Get the new OS to recognize them, get software again, reinstall the software. All that's find equivalent software that runs on the other OS. Nowadays, all your stuff is just in the cloud, or at least so much of it is. And things can just be downloaded quickly and reinstalled very quickly. So switching is like, okay, here I am. I reinstall the software and my files, I don't even really have to move them. So most people don't have files on hard drives the way we nerds do, right?
Even between like Windows and like Mac OS today. All right, say I, for whatever reason, bought a new Mac. I install Creative Cloud. I install all the Adobe apps. They work the same as they did on Windows, just way slower because I don't have a fancy GPU, depending on the circumstances of something specific. But they work the same. The UI is pretty much the same, except for the core user experience aspects of Mac OS and Macs. Like a key is slightly different, or context menus and things work differently.
Or let's say you're like, you got a Windows computer and an Android phone, right? And all your photos are in what? Google Photos?
Yep.
Adobe,
Lightroom.
Right? Something like that, Lightroom. Okay, so now you decide to switch. You throw all your PC and your Android phones in the trash, and you get yourself an iPhone, and you get a MacBook. Okay, what do you install? Lightroom, Google Photos. There's all your photos. You can move them over to iCloud if you want to go to iCloud Photos, but there they are.
So I did exactly the two things I had to deal with when I moved from a long time, deep in Android user to an iOS user. Was just one, I had to just get the muscle memory of the way the gestures and things work in the default user experience. Android uses different gestures, different patterns. It took me about a week to stop constantly trying to hit the back button because in Android, you tend to just hit the back button a lot. In iOS, it's a different interface. But after a week, I was fine. And the other thing I did is I had to I don't even have to talk about apps because 99% of all the apps I use on Android also exist on iOS. The handful that don't are not pertinent to any real conversation.
Or there's an equivalent different app you can get.
Schwazi is not as good on iOS, but that is a weirdo edge case. And while it is technically a deficiency of iOS, it is such an edge case that you can deal with it. You can only touch it with up to 5 fingers. On my Android phone, I could have 10 people all on my screen. It totally worked. But I did have to go through all the Android things I did, which was a combination of apps and core Android features, and look at all the core apps and core features of iOS to decide if I wanted to migrate to the Apple way or keep using the thing I used before. Like Google Keep, I'm migrating into the Apple like reminder stuff because it works really nicely. I like it.
I use Google Tasks.
Yep, I didn't use Google Tasks yet. I still use Google Keep. So I'm migrating from Google Keep to the like the iOS like note reminder thing because
I use Google Keep.
Yep. You Google Keep I really only used for task lists and nothing else at this point. So it was a very easy migration.
The other thing Google Keep is I'll share Google Keeps a lot. Like we got the grocery list on there, it's shared.
But like what else? Like everything else just works. What else was different? Like I looked at Apple Maps for exactly 1 second.
Delete that shit. Yeah.
And of course, I'm using Google Maps, but Google Maps works the same on iOS as it did on Android. The time where they were different is years past. They're the same.
That was like iPhone 4 or 5 days. That was so long ago.
To the point that now there was no transition period other than muscle memory of core user experience gesture type stuff. Everything is just the same. The transition was trivial.
Is that when you're as a software developer, right? If you're not making, some really complex kind of software, even if you develop a video game, you make your video game on Unity, right? Guess what? Doesn't take much work for a Unity video game to run on the Switch and OS X and iOS and PC, right?
Yet, how come nobody makes games that run on Mac OS? Yet those all run on Steam, often another console,
there are
also
quite a
the
few
Switch.
Games that run on there. It's just, this long history and also just the lack of, support and the lack of people on there. Game players don't have those. And also the even if the software did run on there, the ultra high-end games, they don't have the video card.
Yeah.
Right.
But so even like now, switching between like Windows and Mac OS, let's say, or I guess some people go from Windows to iOS because they give up on a computer entirely and just have an iPad.
Yep.
That's an operating system transition. But like you pointed out, most of the people who do that kind of thing, everything they do exists inside of applications or on the internet or on the cloud. It doesn't actually exist in the platform. They're not using like parts of Windows. They don't care about or have a need to use the Microsoft Windows calculator.
Yep. And I think this goes back to what I was saying, what the guy's talk was about is I think the thing he didn't mention, because he was thinking about things from operating system down, right? Hardware. It's like without the users caring about the operating system, users used to need to care about it, right? Because users don't need to care about it anymore. I think that has taken a lot of the pressure off the operating system to be better, right? It's like it could be so much better, but it just doesn't matter that it's not because that's not the right.
Well, also we've gotten to the point where Windows and I guess Microsoft and Apple are adding and like really adding features and focusing on user experience things to make the operating system do that operating systems didn't do before. I personally find almost no value in a lot of those things. Like Windows has added a ton of stuff to synchronize your phone with your Windows PC and like all these features that I really love to see stats on who uses this stuff.
I think almost nobody.
I do also suspect almost nobody.
As soon as I updated to Windows 11, it only took me like 2 minutes, but I went around and I had to remove a bunch of stuff like that they put in there.
Oh, even when I installed Windows 10, I had to turn off half the stuff that Windows 10 tried to make me use that was just worthless.
Windows 11, to its credit, had less of that sort of stuff.
That's good. Because you know what Windows is to me? I hit a Windows key and I start typing the name of a thing, and all I need is for that thing to launch and for a window manager around that thing to not suck and for the hardware I'm using to continue to be usable.
Yeah, and I need the file explorer.
Yep, I do need to be able to look at my files.
And WSL, which is not it's a sort of part of Windows, but sort of not, but I need it because I use that a lot.
So my only failed operating system transition ever was when I tried to go from Linux on the desktop to Mac OS circa 2007?
6?
Six or seven, maybe six. I forget.
Let me look it up.
We could look it up. There's a show where I uploaded at like 2 in the morning.
I could just see when that computer came out, because you got a Mac Mini Core Solo.
Yep.
So when was that?
Oh, I was going to look up when we did the episode where I spent an hour bitching about it instead of the show we tried to record using GarageBand.
The Mac Mini Core Solo, second generation, in February 06. It was.
All right, so it was 06. So in 06, I tried to transition from Linux on the desktop, which was not a great operating system, making quotes at the time, to an Apple platform, rather than go to Windows, because Windows was not a great platform at the time either, and there was no PC gaming to speak of at the time.
Right, it was Windows Vista, and it was console gaming season. We were doing a lot of, mobile Nintendo gaming.
Yep.
Right? The Wii wasn't quite out yet, but we still had GameCube action going on.
So I failed. I bounced off of a platform and had to give up and go back to the platform I was using before. But you know why that happened? One, I was using software that could not run on a Mac. Full stop.
You could have paid for what I was using Audacity. Resound. Audacity.
And I was using, I forget what it's called. There was a third thing I was using that used the real-time other audio subsystem for real-time effects processing. Not Resound. There was another thing. I forget what it was called. Our door. Our fucking door. That's what I used.
Okay.
But I was also those applications don't run on Macs. Fine. But the software that existed on Macs, there was GarageBand, which did not work for what we wanted to do at all.
Pro Tools.
Pro Tools, which was very expensive. And also, while I knew how to use it, I had to use it at RIT extensively. I learned how to use it. It was at the time not well suited to what we were doing, but also I couldn't afford it. And if I could afford it, I was going to buy Audition instead. If I had money, I was going to buy.
You also would have bought a Mac that wasn't the weakest Core
exactly
mini one. You would have bought a more powerful Mac if you had money.
Yep. But effectively, I had a software suite that worked very well, and that software suite did not exist on the platform I wanted to move to, nor did equivalence exist at the time.
Yep.
So if I had money, I would have been going from a Windows computer running Audition to a Mac that was more powerful running Pro Tools. While that would have been a radical change in user experience, that's doable. But I didn't have money, so it ended up being not doable. And then games came out, and of course couldn't run those games on this computer, so I just gave up, and I went back to Linux on the desktop just long enough to build a Windows 7 computer.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that was a broad mishmash of a bunch of different operating system topics, but I think we got it out of our systems.
But yeah, operating systems are sort of in a weird place right now, right? They're worth, I think, as the talk said, that you should watch, right?
Yeah.
They're worth thinking about more, right?
Well, think in the old days,
what their place is.
We knew personally a lot about the operating systems we use. I knew what every option did, even as late as Windows, even Windows 7. I knew a lot of all the things in Windows 7. I use less and less of the footprint of the operating system directly as the years go on.
A lot of it moved in. It's because a lot of the software is no longer native software either. It's just websites. The web browser is the only native application.
All right, that's plenty of show. We went on for an hour and 20.